What are the stories of impact and ingenuity that are transforming our cities? Join us on the Urban Q, where we talk about tackling urban conundrums and celebrate stories, ideas, and people that help us create better cities for all. Hello and welcome to the Urban Q. Today we have with us Dr. Sangita Thakur. Sangita is a writer, accessibility strategist, and founder of Ashtavakra Accessibility Solutions Private Limited. Living with spinal muscular atrophy and a hearing impairment, she has over 30 years of experience in communications and development and has been a powerful voice for disability rights in India. She advances both physical and digital accessibility and attitudinal shifts to enable environments where individuals with disabilities can thrive. She has been a media representative of the Rehabilitation Council of India and has conducted various sensitization and awareness programs for bureaucrats. She was also featured in the first directory of development journalists in India, published by the Press Institute of India. Welcome, Sangita, and thank you so much for joining us on our podcast, The Urban Q.
Thank you so much. I'm feeling very privileged because I feel your platform is going to help us amplify our, you know, demand for accessibility. Thank you so much for hosting me today.
Wonderful. So, Sangeeta, I'm going to start with a question that I pretty much ask all my guests. From your perspective, which is your favorite city in the world and why?
Okay. To be very frank, I have not traveled the world. Given my condition, it's not been possible to even travel throughout India. So it's only been because of my work-related travel, which I covered a few cities. And to be very frank, my exposure is limited. And what I have seen of Indian cities, I don't think any of them are so accessible that I can call it my favorite city. However, staying in Delhi has mean that I have more accessibility than I would have otherwise had in a small town.
And on that note, Sangeeta, I want to ask you about, when you move through an Indian city, even if it is Delhi, a city that you've lived in and that you are familiar with, comfortable in, where are the moments where you feel, most invisible? And what do you think is causing that invisibility as a person living with disability?
Well, I feel very invisible in a city because I feel I have not figured into the planning. So though I have lived half a century on Earth, but I still have to become visible to the planners, the government, the architects, and all the other different agencies that are involved in making a city livable and accessible. So I'm still waiting for even smart cities to become accessible. So one aspect is being invisible to everybody who matters in making my world accessible. And the second one is the social invisibility, which comes because of lack of understanding and awareness amongst people. So I'll give you a small example. For example, when I go to airports, the first question they ask me is if I'm traveling alone, as though I need to have someone with me to be able to communicate with them. And if I have a companion with me, then instead of asking me questions, they immediately start addressing all their queries to my companion. So that makes me feel invisible. And then there have been occasions I've been irritated and told them that, look, talk to me. I can understand you. So that points to two things. One is lack of awareness that people with disabilities have agency and that they can talk about themselves.
Yeah.
And the other is that there's a great deal of discomfort in engaging with people with disabilities.
That's such a nuanced insight for people about how people with disabilities kind of experience the world, which is so very different. But coming down to the point that you mentioned earlier about being excluded in planning, now India has strong sort of disability rights laws on paper, right? So there are those laws that exist. But what's the first thing that gets in the way when we try to turn these into everyday sort of reality? How?
See, as far as our rights, I mean, our laws go, I think India is one of the most progressive laws on accessibility and inclusion in the global south. However, what we lack is implementation and accountability. And accountability comes from different organizations, agencies that are involved in building the city. For example, it could be any of the agencies that are building the roads, metros. They are building, markets, and they are building the footpaths. So different organizations, and every state has different agencies. So though the central laws are very, very strong, I think when it the trickle down effect of that has been diluted. So it needs to be an effort in which all these agencies are on the same page, they are involved. So we have metros coming up which are accessible, but the last mile and the first mile accessibility does not exist. So how do we correct this? So first of all, we need also budgetary allocations. We need to understand that accessibility and inclusion is not a charity. It is something which needs to be part of the entire planning process. Without a dedicated budget for building accessibility, we cannot expect it always going to be last minute stopgap retrofitting, which is in the long term more expensive than actually building accessibility right from the planning stage. What I feel is we have the laws by the ministries, and they should be implemented across states instead of states coming up with their own laws. Different departments are coming up with their own laws, and then what has happened is that every ministry and department, at least in the center government, has come up with their own accessibility laws and standards. But then where is the implementation? If we could have focused on HGSS, that is the harmonized guidelines, we could have made it mandatory. It is supposed to be mandatory. Even NBC's 2016 is mandatory. There's an entire section which is on accessibility. But then, unless, as the Supreme Court also pointed out to the government, that we need to move from guideline, based laws to something which is absolutely mandatory. And if you don't do it, you are liable to pay big fine, not small fine, big fine. So I think nothing else is going to work in our country except building awareness of the laws and also enforcing implementation with a real strong hand and strong will.
So that's very interesting, especially the point that you're making about, coordinating between agencies so that when you step out of a metro station, you're still in a place which is accessible. And the point that you made about budgets. Now, assume, there were budgets and there is awareness, and picture a street market or a busy transit hub, crowded and chaotic. One of your recent videos of trying to navigate Janpath on a wheelchair really went viral. And beyond just putting in sort of the obvious, ramps or lifts, what would true accessibility in a public space, in a market situation look like?
The true accessibility will be when the infrastructure can be, it's predictable, and not just for people on wheelchair, but also for people who can't see, like the blind and of people with low vision, elderly. So we need to have predictability in our built environment. We need to know that this is how it goes. I mean, this is what I can expect when I go out in the market. We also need to have all those elements that go into making a city. For example, you have hawkers, you have storekeepers. Now, I've done another accessibility audit of a market in Noida. That Sector 18 market was redeveloped, and you won't believe it. It was made accessible. It has ramps. It has in front of stores. There's enough space for wheelchairs to go. And I think it was built on the lines of the market we see abroad. I mean, I can't recall which market exactly. However, despite all the things that they have done, it is totally inaccessible because the storekeepers, the store owners, have encroached upon the space which is ideally meant for wheelchair users. And also the ramps, in front of the ramps, you'll find cars are parked, there are hawkers around. So if we talk about making a talk, I mean, accessibility, then we need to educate each of the people, each of the sections in society to understand how they are supposed to work around accessibility. And in fact, when they were building, they should have carried out these, awareness and sensitization drives. They should have come up with these guidelines that you're not supposed to roll out your carpet in front of your shop or
Yeah.
bring out your wares and put it in the path so that there is no path for people to, cross. And they should also be made aware that we also have money to spend, and that's where we need to bring change, and that can only happen if people are made aware, if we have campaigns on a massive national scale to make people understand what is accessibility, what is inclusion, and why it is a must.
And you're right, there are places which have perfectly good, disabled friendly infrastructure. But because the awareness is not there, that infrastructure is either blocked, unused, or it is in a state of, poor maintenance, etc. So that's very important about people not trying to deliberately being are not trying to be thoughtless. It is just that they have not been sensitized. And coming to the work that you're doing through Ashtavakra, you are trying to sensitize and mainstream physical and design digital accessibility. Can you tell us about the work that you're doing, the resources that you have developed to enable this sensitization?
We have a very fragmented and nascent market where where though we have standards, how it's being implemented or not implemented, there is nobody to account for that. There is no way to check whether we accessibility auditors are actually doing our work really well and ensuring that we are following all the guidelines. So with Ashtavakra, what I've been trying to do is to make accessibility audit a very professional and and uh, professional service, because I feel that it requires a lot of expertise to be able to ensure that you are implementing all these guidelines and the standards in the environment which you are auditing. But there is total lack of understanding of accessibility on the part of organization. What they are looking for is experts who can guide them over from end to end. For example, if I'm working with a company, I'm a real estate group, then the requirement is turnkey. You need to guide them right from the beginning, and it better, like I said, that implementation of accessibility measures is done in the design itself, because then implementing it as the construction is going on is easier for the for the company. And then we have a final audit to ensure that we have actually implemented all the recommendations that were made in the design audit. So this is the turnkey project which I feel is required in India. The markets that already exist, or say the buildings that are already there, they
Yeah.
did not they don't have doorways which are of a specific width which will allow wheelchairs to pass through, right? The ramps, now I went to Puri for a conference, and I was put up at a hotel which claimed to be accessible, and they had a ramp, but the ramp was almost perpendicular.
Mm,
So, but they couldn't do anything about it because their building is on at a height, and it does not allow them to build a ramp which can be of the required specification. They don't have any alternative route also. So
mm,
they built a ramp to comply with it. Now, if an expert had guided them, then maybe they would have advised them to use a platform lift instead of building a ramp. A
right.
platform lift would have been more, more accessible and safer than a ramp, which could actually topple me backward. So, to use that ramp, I required four people to hold my wheelchair, two
Mhm.
at the back and two at the front. So you can understand that uh, this is the gap which is existing in the market, and this is where we are trying to establish ourselves as experts who know our business, who have studied all the laws, who have studied all the standards, not just Indian standard, but also international standards. Because in India, you have companies, Fortune 500 companies, and you have companies with investors coming in from Europe and all over the world. And all these other countries have come up with very stringent laws as per their international standard. So the requirement is to be able to implement all these different standards as per the ask of the client. So we have been building our toolkits. We are also in the process of building a platform. And I have grand big ideas to how I would like to also train people with disabilities to become accessibility auditors and also provide them with trained surveyors to help them carry out the work of audits from wherever they are.
No, it's brilliant what you're trying to solve for, Sangeeta, and so much needed. But let me talk about a little bit about sort of also the societal sort of attitudes around this, right? Have you had or encountered moments where someone's attitude was a bigger barrier than the physical space itself? How do you start shifting that mindset?
Yeah, so there have been many occasions which, to be very frank, have impacted my self confidence. They eroded my self confidence when I was younger. It took me a lot of struggle to overcome this, and that is my understanding. My interactions have led me to believe that that is not my personal experience, but most people with disabilities also face similar experiences because the attitudinal challenges that we face is is more harming than the physical challenges. But there's no quick fix. My personal experience mostly has been in the professional space, of course, um, because I was always visualized and after I was hired, which has never been through the proper normal interview channel, because I could never go beyond the interview after telling them that I'm deaf. And it's mostly my hearing disability which has been a bigger challenge than my locomotor disability. So
Mm.
uh, it was always through networks that I could land a good job. And once I landed that job, they realized that I'm damn good at what I do. So but what would eventually happen is that I'd be asked to use all my brain and come up with all the all the um, whatever we are working on.
Right.
However, after that, I take a back seat, and it would never be me who would be at the front end, right? So, in fact, working with the government also gave me a real bad, experience. Finally, I quit the job because I couldn't take it anymore. I don't want other people walking away with their credit for what I'm working on, because I really work hard. And if you have come across other people with disabilities, you may also know that being disabled, we have to work doubly hard to prove ourselves, and we have to, it's not a one time working doubly hard, but like it requires us to continuously keep on proving ourselves that we are good, we are good, we are great, we can do this, we can do this. So that is very exhausting. That
Yeah.
is very exhausting for us. And how can we overcome this kind of an attitude is two ways. One is self advocacy. We need
Hmm.
to start talking about ourselves and underlining what we want, what we can do. Tell the people that look, this is what I'm bringing to the table, and I want credit for this. The other thing is making people aware, not through those half an hour sensitization workshops, etc., but it has to be a constant continuous engagement
Hmm.
with people with disabilities, which will make others aware, non-disabled aware, that these people are capable of doing anything and everything that we do. And sometimes, and often I will say, we can do it better than anybody else because we are more focused on proving ourselves. So
Yeah.
we bring all our intelligence and expertise and sincerity to whatever we are working on.
That's very good to hear. So basically, you have to work on both ends of the spectrum. with people with disabilities and those without disabilities, and how do you kind of bring them to a middle ground? That's fantastic, and it's great to hear about your work that you're doing on both ends of that spectrum, Sangeeta. So now we'll move into the quick and final sort of, a quick sort of rapid fire round, quick questions to give us all a snapshot of your vision for accessible cities. So to start with, which is in city that you think is doing relatively well or is trying to do well on accessibility right now?
We find it in Europe.
Okay.
Europe, there are cities which are doing very well, and I think Budapest is one of them. And that is, this is seamless integration of uh, different transportation systems. Like we spoke about the lack of first mile, last mile.
All right. Fantastic. And that was my next question is, what's the thing that you would want to change in our mobility system? So you're saying first mile and last mile and complete integration around that. Great. Now, the best accessibility feature that you've seen that we need to mainstream more in Indian cities.
We also need toilets. We need, and I've seen it abroad that the toilets are absolutely accessible. So if we are moving around in the city and we need to visit the loo, I mean, we just cannot. And that is one of the biggest reasons for women specifically not coming out in the public, because we cannot use public urinals, which are so filthy. So I think that's another thing which I would want.
Wonderful. And the last question, what is the small change in public spaces that can actually have a huge impact for people with disabilities and their ability to move around?
Low floor buses. That could be, yes. And also accessible cabs. We need them really desperately, because that would make it easy for us to just roll on with a wheelchair on the buses, and also roll down on our own. That will give us a lot of independence. So I think that's another important thing.
Wonderful. Well, Sangeeta, this has been a super enlightening, I think a very good conversation for me, for my personal awareness, and I'm sure the audience will think the same. Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing in this space. And I know when we talked last, you said that you want to come at this from an advocacy standpoint, but also in terms of empowerment and what actually can be changed in physical spaces, in sort of people's mental models to enable sort of people with disabilities to be seen as mainstream and to have space for themselves. So thank you for the very important work that you're doing. More power to you, and good luck. Hope to stay in touch, Sangeeta.
Thank you, Jaya. Just to finish off this conversation with you, what we adopt at Ashtavakra is 360-degree approach to inclusion, and that includes everything: digital, physical, attitudinal, and communications. Unless we adopt this model for inclusion, it's always going to be lopsided, compliance driven, and incomplete. Thank you so much for having me on board. I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sangeeta.